We're going to tell you about the fighting in Korea. Not through battle diagrams, logistics, or history of campaigns, but in terms of the soldier in the front lines, the individual who fights the battles, who lives in a bunker and washes his socks in a steel helmet. He's enduring a way of life remote from the daily living he once shared at home with you. Do you remember how you began this day? How you spent this morning?
January 1951 was a bitter month for 8th Army soldiers stationed in Korea. With sub-zero temperatures and abandoned hopes for an early end of the conflict, they now faced a seemingly undefeatable enemy of unknown size and location. General Matthew Ridgway, the newly appointed commander of 8th Army, realized that his soldiers felt beaten. His response was to begin looking for a place to regain the initiative, a place to employ his favorite Army slogan: find them, fix them, fight them, finish them. That place would be Chipyong-ni.
The mission of the Army is to win battles, right?
That sure is.
Well, now, how does this fit into making this soldier a good fighting man?
Carl, we can never have a good fighting man unless he knows what he is fighting for and why he is fighting.
Ridgway's strategy to retake the peninsula would begin with an offensive push north. Known as Operation Roundup, his plan called for I Corps, 9th Corps, and 10th Corps to advance north from a line of departure established between the villages of Chipyong-ni, Hoengsong, and Pyeongchan. Consequently, the 2nd Infantry Division's, or 2ID's commander, General Clark F. Ruffner, tasked the 23rd Regimental Combat Team, or RCT, to advance from the Twin Tunnels and occupy Chipyong-ni to establish a western strongpoint to anchor 10th Corps' line.
Army Doctrine Publication 3-90 explains, a strong point is a heavily fortified battle position tied to a natural or reinforcing obstacle to create an anchor for the defense, or to deny the enemy decisive or key terrain. Commanders prepare a strong point for all-around defense. Commanders establish a strong point when anticipating enemy actions that will temporarily isolate a defending force, retaining terrain critical to the overall defense.
The United Nations Command, or UNC, predicted that Chinese Communist Forces, or the CCF, were planning an attack through Chipyong-ni toward the Han River Valley. Ridgway hoped that seizing Chipyong-ni would secure 10th Corps' western flank as the Republic of Korea, or ROK, 5th and 8th Divisions attacked north off their eastern flank to destroy the enemy forces in the area of Hancheon. As a junction of mountain rail and road passes set between Seoul and Wonju, Chipyong-ni had operational significance. The CCF needed to control Chipyong-ni to maintain the offensive. The 8th Army needed to secure it if they were to shape offensive operations elsewhere on the peninsula.
To meet his commander's intent, Colonel Paul L. Freeman, Jr. crafted the 23rd RCT's mission for Chipyong-ni around the concept of area defense, which Field Manual 3-0 describes as a defensive operation that concentrates on denying enemy forces access to designated terrain for a specific time rather than destroying the enemy outright. The focus of the area defense is to retain the terrain where the bulk of the defending force positions itself, in mutually supporting prepared positions.
Ridgway needed Freeman to hold the ground at Chipyong-ni to disrupt the CCF's offensive operations. On 2 February, in preparation for advancing on the village, the 23rd RCT used artillery fires to neutralize suspected CCF positions in the area. Fires focused in particular on Hill 319, which dominated the entrance to the objective along Highway 24. Then, on the clear, cold morning of 3 February, the 23rd RCT advanced roughly 4.8 kilometers north from the Twin Tunnels. Though the 23rd RCT observed CCF elements on Hill 506, it did not engage them, and therefore arrived at Chipyong-ni without incident.
Now this really packs a wallop. Your shell is about yay big around, and when it hits those tanks, it really knocks them out. I saw one tank hit by when I saw this personally, and the turret blew off completely and did a complete flip before it hit the ground.
FM 3-0 explains that, during an area defense, commanders build the decisive operation around identified decisive points, such as key terrain. The commander's decisive operation in an area defense focuses on retaining terrain by using fires from mutually supporting, prepared positions supplemented by one or more counterattacks and the repositioning of forces from one location to another.
Chipyong-ni straddled a stream at the lower end of a small valley and was bordered by the low mountain mass of Pongmi-san and the foothills of Mangmi-san. The peak of Mangmi-san, Hill 397, dominated Chipyong-ni from the south. Approximately 3.2 kilometers to the southwest sat Hill 248, with Hill 345 situated to the northwest. Hill 348 sat to the north, with Hill 506 found to the northeast, and Hill 319 located on the southeast. Upon arrival at Chipyong-ni, the 23rd RCT occupied the village and established a perimeter defense.
Army Techniques publication 3-90.5 describes a perimeter defense as a defense oriented in all directions. The unit establishes a perimeter defense when it must hold critical terrain in areas where the defense is not tied in with adjacent units. Units may also form a perimeter when they have been bypassed and isolated by the enemy and must defend in place.
Freeman stated,
"In accordance with Ridgway's new strategy for turning the 8th Army around and stopping the Chinese and what was left of the North Korean Army, we prepared to hold that very important road junction and to thwart any Chinese movements, reinforcements, or attack."
Just as General Ridgway deemed Chipyong-ni key terrain for 8th Army, Colonel Freeman recognized that he would not be able to hold the vital road junction without retaining the reverse slope of Hill 348 and the rail line running east to west along the southern edge of the village. If the CCF seized these areas, they would possess a decided advantage in attacking and possibly overrunning the forces inside Chipyong-ni. These features became key terrain for the 23rd RCT and were integrated into its defensive plan. In February 1951, the 23rd RCT fielded 5 organic elements, a headquarters company, 3 rifle battalions with 3 rifle companies and 1 weapons company, a tank company operating M4A3 Shermans, a heavy mortar company with 3 platoons, and a service company composed of a supply and transportation platoon along with a pioneer and anti-tank platoon. The 2ID attached additional units to the 23rd RCT. These included the French Battalion of the United Nations Organization, composed of 4 companies and a rock company. The 1st Ranger Company with 3 platoons, Baker Battery 82nd Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion, the 37th Field Artillery Battalion with 3 105mm towed howitzer batteries, and Baker Battery 503rd Field Artillery with a battery of 155mm towed howitzers, Baker Company 2nd Engineer Combat Battalion, and a platoon from the 2nd Medical Battalion. By 13 February, the 23rd RCT totaled just over 5,000 soldiers. The 23rd RCT struggled to defend a large perimeter at the Twin Tunnels. At Chipyong-ni, if Freeman placed his troops on the larger elevated hills, the 23rd RCT would have stretched across an indefensible perimeter up to 6.4 kilometers in diameter. Instead, Freeman developed his perimeter by tracing the lower hills inside the dominating heights. That meant the 23rd RCT occupied positions on the lower hills adjacent to the village, covering a more manageable perimeter of approximately 1.6 kilometers in diameter. Freeman described the terrain as
admirable for defense by a force of our size. Here we could dig in our main position on low hills, which would facilitate defensive fires, resupply, and construction of obstacles. Enemies seizing the higher ground around our position would not be able to direct effective small arms fire against us, but would be vulnerable to our supporting fires.
Engineers worked for 4 days under adverse weather conditions. Well, 4 days and 4 nights, because they had to work at night under floodlights.
Under floodlights?
Under floodlights, and you can really appreciate that when you realize that they were located 200 to 300 yards ahead of our front lines and had for security a company from the 16th Recon to support them and protect them. And they were under constant harassing mortar fire and long-range machine gun and rifle fire for the entire time.
The 23rd RCT's position at Chipyong-ni was about 32 kilometers away from the Division Command Post, or CP. Yet the regiment benefited from uninterrupted communications with friendly units. Aerial reconnaissance and intelligence reports from both 10th Corps and 2ID confirmed the massing of the CCF in the area. Colonel Freeman recognized the risk posed to his soldiers by the massed infantry assaults favored by the CCF. It was necessary, therefore, for Freeman's plan for the defense of Chipyong-ni to include the 7 steps of engagement area development.
As addressed in Army Doctrine Publication 3-90, an engagement area is an area where the commander intends to contain and destroy an enemy force with the massed effects of all available weapons and supporting systems. The 7 steps of engagement area development are: identify all likely enemy avenues of approach, determine likely enemy schemes of maneuver, determine where to kill the enemy force, plan and integrate obstacles, in-place weapon systems, plan and integrate indirect fires, and rehearse.
To accomplish these goals, Freeman positioned his soldiers using compass points as a reference. To the north, 1st Battalion defended the perimeter. To the east, 3rd Battalion prepared defenses in an area that included an open rice field. 2nd Battalion defended the perimeter's southern arc of low hills, including the train station and tracks that ran through the village. The French Battalion defended the western arc of the perimeter. Freeman placed his reserve, comprised of Baker Company, 1st Battalion, and the Ranger Company, in the center of the village. Freeman then employed his M4A3 Sherman tanks, 4 M19 multiple-gun motor carriages, and 6 M16 multiple-gun motor carriages, or air defense half-tracks, to provide direct fire in support of the front line's engagement area. A deliberate fire support plan covered both observable and unobservable areas, including the placement of heavy machine guns low to the ground for grazing fire along the wire and across open areas. The 2nd Engineer Combat Battalion then prepared the perimeter with barbed wire, mines, and booby traps made from C-ration cans and hand grenades. Field artillery and mortars were emplaced within the perimeter. The 23rd RCT's fire support plan incorporated extensive pre-planned and range targets to ensure optimal coverage. Additionally, forward observers refined and registered pre-planned targets. To coordinate close air support, a tactical air control party was attached, and Freeman placed it with the unit CP that remained in the village center. Battalion commanders directed their soldiers to dig fighting positions deep enough to stand in, with covers to mitigate the threat of Bangalore charges used by the enemy. However, Baker Battery 503rd Field Artillery arrived after the 23rd RCT established the perimeter. To make room for the battery of 155mm howitzers, George Company relocated to a more exposed part of the perimeter. That left George Company just enough time to prepare new, yet not elaborate, fighting positions. As a final precaution, come evening, each company sent out 2 or 3 soldiers to establish observation posts roughly 20 meters in front of the perimeter. Finally, Freeman went a step further. He deployed elements approximately 900 meters from the established perimeter before daylight each morning. Here, soldiers prepared more fighting positions and emplaced trip flares, mines, barbed wire, and booby traps. Additionally, daylight patrols reconnoitered in front of his advance line to warn of any enemy movement. Under cover of darkness, the soldiers then returned to their primary positions within the established perimeter. This tactic provided an extra layer of protection to the perimeter defense by deceiving the CCF into overestimating the size of the 8th Army's presence at Chipyong-ni.
They send about 3 waves against you, and the first wave would have burp guns, automatic rifles, and second wave would have grenades, and the third wave wouldn't have nothing. But when we'd shoot down the first wave, we'd destroy them, the third wave would pick up weapons and keep on coming against us.
Much like they do in the offense, commanders conduct shaping operations in the defense to regain the initiative by limiting the attacker's options and disrupting the attacker's plan.
According to Army Doctrine Publication 3-90, a defending force does not wait passively to be attacked. They aggressively seek ways of attriting and weakening enemy forces before close combat begins. The static and mobile elements of a defense combine to deprive enemy forces of the initiative.
As the 23rd prepared their defensive positions, Ridgway and Freeman recognized the need to attack the CCF and prevent them from concentrating their forces. To do this, Colonel Freeman needed to determine the CCF's disposition and most likely scheme of maneuver. Between its arrival at Chipyong-ni on 3 February and the first major attack on the 13th, the 23rd RCT conducted aggressive reconnaissance operations to locate the enemy. The 23rd RCT employed its artillery to support its reconnaissance patrols and ensure that they did not become decisively engaged. On 4 February, 1st Battalion sent a reinforced squad to reconnoiter Hill 345, where it located an enemy company. After exchanging small arms fire, artillery fired on the hill for the rest of the day. Artillery fires also struck Hill 506, where another patrol identified the enemy. On 5 February, Baker Company tasked 2nd Platoon under Lieutenant Herschel E. Chapman to reconnoiter Hill 506. Having recently snowed, the patrol donned all over-white clothing and was able to approach within 2 meters of the enemy's position. Startled, the CCF employed automatic weapons fire, forcing 2nd Platoon to withdraw as U.S. artillery fired on the hill. Elsewhere on 5 February, the 23rd RCT observed enemy movements at Sangasong, a village east of Chipyong-ni. In response, Freeman tasked Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, and 3 tanks with conducting an area reconnaissance of the village. However, as they patrolled the Sangasong, shell craters in the road impeded the tanks' movement, leaving the infantry to advance on the village without armor support.
According to ADP 3-90, an area reconnaissance is a form of reconnaissance that focuses on obtaining detailed information about the terrain or enemy activity within a prescribed area. An area reconnaissance differs from a zone reconnaissance in that areas are normally smaller than zones and are not usually contiguous to other friendly areas targeted for reconnaissance. Because the area is smaller, an area reconnaissance typically takes less time to complete than a zone reconnaissance.
As the patrol neared Hill 363, the CCF opened fire until U.S. Army artillery from Chipyong-ni temporarily silenced the enemy, allowing the soldiers to continue toward Sangasong. With the arrival of CCF reinforcements, the patrol came to a halt. Under orders to not become too heavily engaged, the Americans withdrew under covering artillery fire and direct fire from the recently arrived tanks. Although forced to withdraw, Easy Company accomplished its reconnaissance mission by confirming CCF units were massing at Sangasong. Having identified what he believed to be the enemy's main effort and primary avenue of approach, Colonel Freeman could now conduct a spoiling attack to disrupt the CCF's preparations and prevent them from concentrating their forces at a decisive point in his area defense.
As noted in FM 3-0, a spoiling attack is a tactical maneuver employed to seriously impair a hostile attack while the enemy is in the process of forming or assembling for an attack. A spoiling attack impairs the enemy's ability to launch an attack by forcing the enemy to react, disrupting timelines, causing losses, and placing the enemy's plan of attack at risk. Commanders synchronize the conduct of the spoiling attack with other defensive actions.
On 7 February, Freeman tasked 2nd Battalion with clearing Sangasong. Reinforced with a tank platoon, the battalion departed Chipyong-ni at 08. The formation encountered the same craters that disrupted Easy Company's movement the day prior. Realizing that patching the craters would take 2 hours, the battalion commander ordered Hotel Company to advance without armor support. By 12:45, the remainder of the battalion resumed its advance after patching the craters. With armor support, the patrol secured Sangasong and cleared Hill 506. As the soldiers advanced towards Hills 218 and 320, CCF mortar rounds began impacting Sangasong. forcing them to withdraw while the tank platoon engaged targets on hills 218 and 320. Despite 23rd RCT's attempts to prevent the CCF from doing so, the enemy steadily increased its presence around Chipyong-ni. On 8 February, Freeman sent another patrol composed of 3rd Battalion and 5 tanks to Sangasong. Stiff CCF resistance on Hill 539 prevented the battalion from clearing the village and linking up with a patrol from 1st Battalion 9th Infantry advancing on the hill from the opposite direction. Although 3rd Battalion reported weapons fire to the southeast, Freeman's troops never made contact with the other U.S. units. Realizing that the 23rd RCT was becoming increasingly surrounded by the CCF, Freeman ordered the soldiers to continue engagement area development and reconnaissance patrols in preparation for the impending attack. On 9 February, a reinforced rifle platoon from George Company patrolled Hill 129. Yet that patrol encountered no enemy. On Hill 397, a patrol from Fox Company placed booby traps and mines after not locating any trace of the enemy as well. On the night of 10 February, CCF troops were close enough to set off recently placed trip flares on Hill 397. 2nd Battalion positioned a platoon from Easy Company at the base of the hill to listen for further enemy activity, but no contact was made. To gather additional intelligence on their opponents, Freeman dispatched 2 platoons from the Ranger Company to capture prisoners for interrogation from among enemy forces located at the nearby village of Chengde. A 30-minute skirmish unfolded as the Rangers encountered stiff enemy resistance. Lieutenant Colonel James W. Edwards remarked,
"The CCF were the only ones that captured any prisoners that night."
Despite multiple efforts to dislodge the enemy, encirclement of Freeman's troops now appeared imminent.
How did you form a defense there?
Well, we set up a circle. In other words, we put all our men we had in a circle so that we could guard all sides. They were attacking us from all sides.
While the 23rd RCT's position at Chipyong-ni remained relatively stable, the 8th Army's operational situation deteriorated on the night of 11 February. The enemy disrupted the 8th Army's advance north as, according to General Ridgway,
an estimated 21 Chinese divisions and 9 North Korean divisions attacked the center of our defense line, specifically the U.S. 10th Corps and the ROK 3rd Corps.
The 5th and 8th ROK divisions to the east of the 23rd RCT were scattered as a result, leaving gaps in the defensive line. Ridgway responded by pulling all UNC forces southward. The only exception was the 23rd RCT at Chipyong-ni. Major General Edward M. Ullman, 10th Corps commander, General Ruffner, 2nd Infantry Division commander, and Colonel Freeman all wanted to withdraw the 23rd RCT from Chipyong-ni. Ridgway disagreed. If he withdrew the 23rd with the rest of 2nd ID, the CCF could advance unopposed to the Han River Valley and threaten the positions of 9th and I Corps, which were west of the Han. Already in well-prepared defensive positions, the 23rd RCT also offered Ridgway a perfect scenario to prove the CCF could be defeated and provide a much-needed morale boost to UNC forces in Korea. On 12 February, aerial observers spotted the first signs of CCF action against Chipyong-ni. Major enemy movements, unusual for the CCF during daylight hours, were observed among the woods and hills surrounding the village. This led to U.S. Army 155mm howitzers targeting the enemy north of the village. Patrols also returned with CCF prisoners who identified elements from 5 CCF divisions in the area. Other than a few minor probing attacks, there were no further engagements with the enemy that day or night.
But we did have most of the things we needed. Parkas, shoe packs, pile liners, hoods. We were pretty well bundled up and pretty comfortable, too.
Did you say comfortable, Chuck?
Well, as comfortable as you can be at 22 degrees below zero.
By the next day, 13 February, the CCF had completed its encirclement of the 23rd RCT. Comprised of the 344th Regiment, 115th Division, the 356th Regiment, 119th Division, the 359th Regiment, 120th Division, and the 376th Regiment, 126th Division, the CCF prepared to assault Chipyong-ni. Freeman met with his commanders and informed them of the situation. Captain Bickford Sawyer, Easy Company's commander, remembers that meeting this way.
When Colonel Freeman said at Chipyong, "We're surrounded, but we'll stay here and fight it out," we supported him with enthusiasm. There was never a doubt in our minds. We knew we were going to succeed.
Freeman's staff had already prepared for the coming battle by prearranging for airstrikes and airdrops of supplies that would inevitably be needed. Freeman was particularly concerned that mortar ammunition would run out, as mortars were the infantry's primary indirect fire support. When the last replacements from division arrived before the fighting began, Lieutenant Colonel Edwards briefed them to
not leave their positions until ordered out.
He also emphasized the importance of maintaining fire discipline to not reveal their positions. Private Seymour Harris recalls the tension American soldiers felt prior to the CCF's attack.
Again, it is bitterly cold. The snow creaks loudly underfoot. Even the tree limbs crack and make strange noises. The word is out. Tonight we will have 100% alert. Tonight is the night. There is no place to run, no place to pull back to. Our backs are to the wall. Colonel Freeman and Lieutenant Colonel Edwards have checked and rechecked our positions. They have personally checked fields of fire and made corrections where necessary. I am praying, not for my life, but for the guts it will take to see me through this. I pray that I will not let anybody down, that I will be able to do what I came here to do.
At approximately 22:07 hours, CCF elements attacked the 23rd RCT perimeter with small arms fire and mortars. Just before midnight, an artillery barrage targeted the northern perimeter as well. As soon as it lifted, CCF infantry assaulted the defenses of the 1st Battalion on the north and the French Battalion placed on the western edge of the perimeter. Focusing on Able and Charlie companies of the 1st Battalion, mortar fires pinned Charlie Company down. Maintaining fire discipline, they waited until the CCF soldiers tripped flares, anti-personnel mines, and booby traps to the company's front, instead of firing at noises or shadows. 1st Battalion then opened with artillery and mortars on pre-planned targets that Freeman soldiers had registered during the previous week and a half. This combination of small arms fire, pre-planned fires, mines, and other anti-personnel obstacles repelled the CCF. A little after 0100 hours on 14 February, CCF infantry maneuvered along a finger of high ground that led into the boundary between Able and Charlie companies to attack Charlie Company's flank. Again, 23rd RCT fire discipline prevailed as soldiers waited to return fire until the CCF reached the barbed wire marking the trip line in front of their fighting positions. When the CCF attempted to cut through the wire, 23rd RCT soldiers opened fire with support from the Quad 50s and tanks in the low ground between Charlie Company and the French positions. Once more, the CCF fell back with heavy losses. To the south, CCF soldiers assaulted again through the tripwires and anti-personnel mines of the engagement area. This time, the enemy reached the barbed wire in front of Easy Company, but CCF troops floundered in the face of firepower from a Quad 50. Unable to penetrate Easy Company's lines, CCF troops regrouped for an assault through a railway tunnel 100 meters in front of 1st and 2nd platoons. Freeman's troops placed drums of foo gas, a thick, fuel-based liquid akin to napalm, near the tunnel as part of the defensive perimeter. As the CCF approached through the tunnel, Captain Sawyer, the Easy Company commanding officer, detonated the foo gas using an explosive charge to project the burning liquid into the mouth of the tunnel. The CCF never again attacked through the tunnel. Just past midnight, the CCF bombarded the 23rd's positions with Soviet-made 120mm mortars and 76mm field guns. The first fires were inaccurate, but CCF artillery fire improved after one of the rounds set a Quad 50 ablaze along with the 1st Battalion command post. Guided by the flames, the CCF adjusted artillery fires, accurately targeting the battalion's CPs, supply dumps, and artillery and mortar positions. One round hit the regimental command post, killing the S2, Major Harold Shoemaker. The most critical portions of the fighting occurred in the sectors occupied by George Company, 2nd Battalion, and the French companies. CCF elements approached the French 1st Company positioned near the train station by advancing under cover along a railroad cut. Like the Americans, the French soldiers maintained their fire discipline until the CCF infantrymen ascended the railroad embankment. Firing on them with every weapon available, they routed the attackers. The French 2nd Company's positions on the west side of the village, while exposed, offered the best fields of fire. Supported by Quad 50s, French fire devastated the enemy attempting to cross the open ground in front of Hill 248. Having found most of their dead at the twin tunnels in their fighting positions, the French prepared alternate positions forward of their primary defensive positions before the battle. When the CCF attacked, French soldiers in the alternate positions fell back. Then, like a scene out of the First World War, their comrades in the primary positions charged the CCF infantry with fixed bayonets, driving the CCF out of the perimeter. As the French 2nd Company repulsed the CCF attack in this manner, George Company defended a more exposed, less defensible position that lacked clear fields of fire. Located on a low ridge that was not as dominant as other American-held positions, they were unable to develop their engagement area as effectively. At 2300 hours on the night of 13 February, 2 CCF infantry squads probed George Company's line. While one crawled along the saddle from Hill 397, the other approached through a dry creek bed running in front of the American position. George Company repulsed these probes. Regrouping, the CCF hit their position again some 3 hours later with 6 squad-sized attacks on the morning of 14 February. 1st and 2nd platoons held, but enemy infantry broke through 3rd platoon. In response, Major Lloyd Jensen, 2nd Battalion's executive officer, committed a reserve platoon from Fox Company to recapture the overrun position. Meanwhile, the French 2nd Company experienced a brief respite following the first attacks. At 0130, the CCF infantry launched an attack on the train station in an attempt to overrun the artillery position located behind French lines. To do so, the CCF advanced in 2 company-sized rushes from the southwest and west. Although automatic weapons in the Quad 50s killed dozens of CCF infantry as they approached 1st Company, the attack still hit with enough strength to penetrate the French lines. 1st Company commander, Captain Francois de Castries, requested reinforcements. The battalion intelligence officer, Major Maurice Bartholomé, ordered his last reserve of 2 squads from the attached Rock Company to reinforce de Castries. Bartholomé then reported that 1st Company was hard-pressed and the French battalion lacked reserves. In response, regimental headquarters ordered George Company's heavy machine guns on the east of 1st Company to fire in support of the French, while dispatching a platoon of tanks to assist them. Reinforced, 1st Company repulsed the CCF and reoccupied the position. King Company endured attacks by the CCF that night as well. Operating at only 60% of full strength after fighting at the Twin Tunnels, King Company offset its weakness with careful preparation of the engagement area. By digging in below the crest of the hill they occupied and facing the enemy's suspected line of approach, they could fire on the enemy as they advanced over the top. They also employed the firepower of Browning automatic rifles, or BARs, with as much ammunition and grenades as they could carry. CCF artillery bombarded King Company's positions before midnight, allowing their infantry to approach close enough to throw grenades into King Company's fighting positions. Item Company, on King's left flank, sent 2 platoons to reinforce them, so that by 0310, King Company had re-secured its position. At approximately 0420, the CCF assaulted Charlie Company. This time, CCF soldiers attempted to secure the high ground by rolling up the 1st Battalion's line, penetrating and attacking their flank 1 position at a time. Charlie Company, however, withstood their attacks and held through until dawn. The last CCF assault occurred at 0530, when the CCF attacked the French 1st Company again. The French, with the support of 2 75mm recoilless rifles, held the position. When the CCF reformed behind a small ridge for another attack, the French once again fixed bayonets and charged, scattering the CCF infantry and capturing a few prisoners. The prisoners, interrogated by Freeman, confirmed that the perimeter was being attacked by elements of 5 different divisions with an approximate strength of 30,000 soldiers. Reflecting on the first night's fighting, Freeman later said that despite it being rough, the regiment had not been in grave danger at any point. Even so, as dawn approached, A 120mm mortar round detonated near Freeman as he rested on his cot, sending fragments into his leg. Although painful, his wound did not place his life in jeopardy. Captain Robert Hall, the regimental surgeon, recommended that Freeman not be evacuated. Explaining his decision to 2ID's Chief of Staff, Colonel Gerald Epley, Hall stressed that morale was high in the RCT and credited it to the great respect the soldiers shared for Freeman. In his opinion, Freeman's presence was the main reason that the perimeter was still intact. Ignoring Hall's recommendation, Major General Allman ordered Freeman to the rear and dispatched 10th Corps Operation Officer Lieutenant Colonel John H. Childs to Chipyong-ni as his replacement. Freeman had no choice but to remain in place for the time being, when the arriving aircraft damaged its landing gear on the rough landing strip of Chipyong-ni. In the interim, Freeman turned his attention to preparing for the coming night's attack. He tasked as many soldiers as could be spared from improving their positions to work on protecting interior installations.
Falling within the protection warfighting function, ADP 3-90 explains the focus of survivability operations. Survivability in the defense prioritizes hardening command posts, artillery positions, air and missile defenses, and other critical equipment and supply areas.
The frozen ground made digging difficult, but an abundance of railroad ties and rice bags proved useful as revetments for aid stations, fire direction centers, and supply dumps. Still, material for overhead cover remained lacking. Freeman recalled the preparations.
Ammunition was distributed, weapons cleaned and readied, routes reconnoitered by the reserve commanders so as to be able to lead their units to any point in the darkness, wires spliced, armored vehicles serviced, troop flares and mines reset, and numerous other tasks accomplished during the day's lull. Patrols were sent out as far as necessary to provide early warning of any daylight attack. Good, hot meals were served, and the garrison, with fine spirit, determined and confident, waited for the next move.
Desperately in need of resupply after fighting all night, 24 C-110 flying boxcars made airdrops of whatever supplies remained available to logisticians after Operation Roundup. These supplies reached the 23rd RCT pre-packaged and consisted of ammunition, artillery rounds, food, and gasoline. Supply shortages in Japan meant much-needed mortar rounds did not arrive, and the .30 caliber ammunition arrived loose instead of preloaded in the en-bloc clips used in the M1 Garand. Since the rifle ejected the expendable clips after firing the last round, spent clips littered the perimeter. After surveying the perimeter, soldiers loaded those clips with the ammunition from Japan.
ADP 3-90 states, the commander addresses several unique sustainment considerations in the defensive plan. Priorities for replenishment are normally ammunition and materials to construct obstacles and defensive positions. The commander considers stockpiling or caching ammunition and limited amounts of petroleum products in centrally located positions within the main battle area.
While Freeman continued to prepare, Ridgway ordered the relief of the 23rd RCT by the 5th Cavalry Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division. Approaching from the southwest along the main supply route, or MSR, the 5th found it blocked by the CCF. At the same time, the 27th British Commonwealth Brigade was trying to fight past the CCF at the Twin Tunnels area to reach Chipyong-ni. Neither force had arrived by sunset on 14 February, leaving the regiment to endure another night of enemy attacks.
Well, Jim, you saw plenty of napalm drops in Korea. Well, how close to our lines do they drop that stuff?
Well, I've seen it dropped in closest to 100 yards, sometimes probably closer.
Before darkness fell on 14 February, the 23rd RCT spotted CCF troops vacating hiding places and forming into assault units all along the perimeter. 2nd Battalion observed them forming on Hill 397. 3rd Battalion saw other enemy units gathering in locations to the east. Both battalions engaged the enemy with artillery and tank fire, but without mortar support. Freeman still held Baker Company, the Rangers, and Engineers as regimental reserve. Major John Dumaine, the regimental operations officer, also ordered each battalion to designate a man to stand by as a guide for the reserves since illumination flares were in short supply. Lighting up the engagement area at night played such an important role in the defense of Chipyong-ni's perimeter that Division tasked an aircraft to remain on standby for dropping illumination flares as needed.
FM 3-0 notes, illumination fires, visible or infrared, are useful in exposing an opponent at night. Illumination fires may give friendly forces an advantage by reducing the enemy force's ability to operate at night without being targeted and attacked with minimal collateral damage.
Freeman later credited the illumination that night as having
helped save our skins as much as any other gadget of the grim business of night fighting.
It prevented, he said, the CCF troops from concentrating and surprising the defenders. Since the CCF had dug in near the perimeter after the previous night's fighting, their assault began earlier than usual. At approximately 1900, enemy artillery and mortars fell for an hour, effectively striking inside the perimeter. As the CCF signaled their soldiers by bugle to attack, Freeman's troops blew capture bugles to confuse the enemy. The CCF assault concentrated on sectors that had appeared the most vulnerable the previous night, with the first attack occurring in King Company's sector at 2025. At the same time, attacks and indirect fire occurred all around the perimeter. This included 2nd Battalion's George Company and the section of the perimeter held by the French. The CCF attacked in company and platoon waves, pushing through the anti-personnel mines up to the barbed wire. These attacks tested the perimeter, but in most areas failed to break through the wire. After 2 hours, CCF infantry fell back. As CCF soldiers fired heavy mortar and artillery on the defenders, it became clear they had accurately observed the locations of various CPs in and around the village. Using captured US 105mm and 155mm artillery pieces with rounds that they failed to arm, the artillery fire caused only minor damage. Still, the incoming rounds unnerved the defenders. Repulsed and suffering heavy losses, the CCF ceased attacking for a time. Indeed, the 377th Regiment lost more than half of its forces. Instead, CCF soldiers fortified their positions and prepared to focus the attack on George Company's sector. Consequently, George Company's position became the site of the most serious fighting. Recognizing their vulnerability, the soldiers had fortified their position earlier that day. The company's acting commander, Lieutenant Thomas Heath, had coordinated defensive plans with Captain John Elledge, the battalion's artillery liaison officer, and Lieutenant Arthur Rockanowski, the battery commander. All three agreed that the most likely focus of CCF attacks would be the 3rd Platoon's primary position in the center of George Company. Lieutenant Rockanowski agreed to support George Company as best he could. Rockanowski already had 2 machine guns supporting 3rd Platoon, but agreed to set up alternate positions behind it with 2 BARs as further fire support. His battery would also furnish up to 40 additional soldiers to strengthen the company's defenses if necessary. The CCF's first attack on George Company's position began just after 2000 hours, with machine guns firing from Hill 397 in support of an assault on 3rd Platoon. At the same time, the CCF began probing the saddle between 3rd and 1st Platoons. Exploiting a weakness in the line, CCF soldiers seized 2 fighting positions from 1st Platoon's left flank. The enemy then cleared the rest of the line using Bangalore charges and began firing a machine gun into 3rd Platoon to the east. For the first time, CCF troops occupied terrain within 23rd RCT's perimeter. 3rd Platoon's weak position worsened even more as CCF infantry widened the breach in George Company's section of the line by directing fire against 1st and 3rd Platoon. To prevent further CCF gains, Lieutenant Paul J. McGee notified Lieutenant Thomas Heath, acting George Company commander, by runner of the situation. Heath then called the 503rd Field Artillery commander, Lieutenant Rockanowski, who allocated 15 of his artillerymen to support the 3rd Platoon's attempt to retake their positions. As the soldiers began their attack, under the command of Lieutenant Heath, enemy fire immediately killed one of them and wounded another. The rest scattered. Heath quickly reformed them and led them back up the hill, but the group disintegrated again. Still seeking to regain his company's position, Lieutenant McGee sent a runner to locate the company commander. Lieutenant Heath also requested assistance from the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Edwards, who sent a reserve squad from Fox Company. They attacked into the saddle of the hill again, but were forced to withdraw when every soldier in the unit was either killed or wounded. At 0300, Edwards informed the regiment that George Company's position was penetrated. Edwards then organized a counterattack force made up of the remainder of Fox Company, one tank, and a platoon from the Rangers that Freeman sent to assist. Lieutenant Robert Curtis, the battalion assistant operations officer, was ordered to command the counterattack force. Arriving on the scene, Curtis found a desperate and confused situation. Most of George Company's key leaders were wounded, leaving Lieutenant Heath to organize the remnants of George and Fox Companies into a single platoon. Curtis described what happened when he arrived.
At that time, we had 3 60mm mortars, 3 tanks, and light machine gun fires to support the attack, plus the possibility of a quad 50 caliber weapon that was sitting at an angle on a nearby trail but was inoperable in that position. I had lost contact with the mortar fire direction center. The crew assigned to the quad 50 had left the area, but I knew the tankers knew how to fire the weapon. I was told we had some artillerymen forward of the command post, but that they were guarding their howitzers, and I did not count on their assistance in the attack.
Curtis also had difficulty coordinating with First Lieutenant Alfred Herman, commander of the attached Rangers. Herman was concerned about his ability to hold the line with limited troops and light weapons. He also insisted on only taking orders from Freeman, since, he reasoned, the Rangers were directly attached to the colonel. To expedite the command process, Curtis contacted Edwards and requested he send a senior officer to either take command or endorse Curtis's orders. In response, Captain John Ramsburg arrived, and although Herman still disagreed with the mission, he followed Ramsburg's orders. It took another half hour to secure enough soldiers and weapons for the attack. Finally, at 0500, the Americans started up the hill, but the CCF were waiting. When the soldiers crested the hill, they began firing, wounding Ramsburg and killing or wounding those who followed him. Heath immediately assumed command until he was wounded, which left only Lieutenant Curtis, who moved up the hill to take charge of the situation. Searching for his soldiers, Curtis found all of them wounded, and the less seriously hurt helping the more grievously wounded down the hill. Meanwhile, Ramsburg had returned to the command post to organize the next counterattack while nursing his wounded foot. He struggled to find more soldiers, as Curtis organized a squad with the 6 soldiers remaining from Fox Company and the 8 soldiers from George Company. Curtis then rounded up the remaining mortarmen, wiremen, cooks, and radio operators for a total of 25 soldiers. It was still not enough, forcing him to return to the occupied hill to try and find more soldiers. Finding only dead bodies, Curtis realized he was close to the enemy when he heard Chinese voices and the sound of digging. Curtis then returned to a small defensive force and directed the tanks and soldiers to position themselves against a possible enemy attack down the hill. He then went to the company CP to confer with Ramsburg. Surprisingly, Ramsburg made the decision to immediately move all personnel along with the wounded to the rear, further weakening George Company's position. Instead of going with the CP, Curtis returned to his inadequate defensive force only to find it reduced even more in strength. It now consisted of just 2 tanks, a crew-served weapon with an untrained operator, and only 14 soldiers. Talking the situation over with the tank commander and Rockanowski, Curtis asked that one of the 155mm howitzers be used to fire white phosphorus rounds into the hillside. Curtis hoped the display of firepower would keep the CCF from attacking further into the perimeter. Although it requires knowledgeable and well-trained crews, Army doctrine explains that artillery employed as direct fire can provide a decisive response to attacks on vulnerable positions. In this capacity, artillery can have an important demoralizing effect that is not achieved with smaller-scale fires. When 6 rounds of white phosphorus landed on the hillside, setting it ablaze, the tanker decided to make a contribution as well. Rotating his turret and lowering his gun, he fired down the valley in front of the hill, skipping his rounds across the frozen ground. The resulting roar and echo were tremendous. Lacking reinforcements, the artillerymen abandoned their positions by 0700, leaving the CCF to occupy them. 10 soldiers from the French battalion's 1st Company then attempted to retake the hill, supported by the tanks, but CCF fire pinned them down and forced them to withdraw. At this point, Freeman ordered Baker Company from reserve to make the next counterattack. They attacked at 10:15, supported once again by tanks, but the tanks were unable to climb the hill because of snow, and with the CCF laying down heavy fire from the south side of the hill, they were driven back. Throughout the night, Ridgway had remained in contact with the 23rd CP. Understanding they needed relief, he directed Major General Bryant E. Moore, 9th Corps' commander, to provide support to the embattled regiment. In turn, Moore issued a warning order, or warno, to Colonel Marcel G. Crombez, commander of the 5th Cavalry Regiment, 1st Cavalry Division, to clear the route to Chipyong-ni and conduct a relief in place with the 23rd RCT.
As described in FM 3-0, a relief in place is an operation in which all or part of a unit is replaced by the incoming unit, and the responsibilities of the replaced elements are transferred to the incoming unit. A relief may set the stage for resuming the offense. A relief may also serve to free the relieved unit for other tasks, such as decontamination, reconstitution, routine rest, resupply, maintenance, specialized training, or redeployment.
The 5th Cavalry Regiment was the logical choice for relieving the 23rd RCT, having recently been ordered to secure 9th Corps' right flank. Additionally, the composition, location, and size of CCF elements dictated the need for a combined arms task force with sufficient mobility and firepower to break the siege at Chipyong-ni. The 5th Cavalry Regiment fielded 3 battalions of infantry, a medical company, a combat engineer company, a battalion of towed field artillery, a battalion of self-propelled howitzers, and 2 platoons of medium tanks comprised of M4A3 Shermans. General Moore attached Dog Company, 6th Tank Battalion with its M46 Pattons to the 5th Cavalry Regiment. The better armor of the Patton and the ability to fully traverse its 90mm gun in a confined space, like a narrow road through steep terrain, meant Crombez used Dog Company as his lead element. Crombez now commanded Task Force Crombez, a combined arms task force capable of battling its way to Chipyong-ni.
The word for the American soldier is admirable, and I think, frankly, we should put it in the superlative and say most admirable. For the first few months in Korea, the American soldier was strictly a teenager, a Bobby Soxer. And when you consider the tremendous odds against him, the staggering hoods, and the way in which he resisted not only defensively but offensively, we have to stand in complete admiration of him. He's a wonderful fighting man, spiritually, physically.
At 1700 on 14 February, Task Force Crombez departed its assembly area near Yeoju. As the regiment pushed forward through the night, Crombez felt pressure. Commanders of the 1st Cavalry and 2nd Infantry Division, as well as those of 9th and 10th Corps, pressed him to arrive at Chipyong-ni before dark on the 15th. Crombez, however, accurately discerned that, unless his forces could quickly break through the CCF's defenses, he would be unable to reach the 23rd RCT by that deadline. On the 15th, Colonel Childs, now in command at Chipyong-ni with the departure of Freeman, sent a message to 1st Cavalry. It read,
"Reach us as soon as possible. In any event, reach us."
With a sense of urgency, Crombez assembled 23 tanks and attached the 160 infantrymen of Love Company, 3rd Battalion, as security for a dash to the embattled village. Since the CCF held the high ground along the road to Chipyong-ni, Crombez's column encountered heavy enemy resistance. Arriving just south of Chipyong-ni, where sharp cliffs channeled the armored force through a road cut through the ridgeline, several of the lead tanks in the column received hits from bazookas or satchel charges. Luckily, the damage remained minimal. As the column continued its advance, CCF fire struck the 4th tank in line, setting off its stored ammunition and killing several of the crew. The driver, although wounded, managed to break through the enemy and maneuver off the road so that its disabled tank did not impede the column's progress. Continuing on, the column needed to negotiate the gauntlet into Chipyong-ni by synchronizing their fires to support each tank's dash through the pass. While the first tanks entered the cut, the following tanks delivered suppressing fires against both sides of the road. Similarly, once several tanks had reached the far side of the cut, they engaged CCF positions to mitigate enemy fires. All but one of the American tanks successfully ran the gauntlet, but the exposed accompanying infantrymen suffered heavy losses. As Task Force Crombez rumbled closer toward Chipyong-ni, air support arrived above the 23rd RCT. Numerous Marine and Navy aircraft hit the enemy on the slopes of the surrounding hills with napalm, followed by rockets and strafing. When another assault by Baker Company failed to dislodge the CCF from George Company's former positions, airstrikes were called in to drop napalm. 2 additional ground attacks followed, causing heavy casualties among the entrenched CCF soldiers, but still failed to dislodge them. According to CCF after-action reports, its soldiers were only able to weather the 23rd RCT's counterattacks through timely troop adjustments and determination. Airdrops as well resumed with the return of daylight on 15 February, along with the evacuation of the most critically wounded by helicopter. Resupply consisted of small arms ammunition and medical supplies, but once again, no mortar rounds. Fortunately this time, the ammunition for the M1 Garands arrived in clips.
FM 4-95 explains, responsiveness is the ability to react to changing requirements and respond to meet the needs to maintain support. It is providing the right support in the right place at the right time. It includes the ability to anticipate operational requirements.
Air support alone could not end the siege. Understanding this, Lieutenant Colonel Childs assembled Task Force S, which included all available tanks and infantry. He then ordered them to push southward to link up with Task Force Crombez. The 2 task forces met near Hill 397, where their combined firepower scattered CCF elements. The CCF perceived Task Force Crombez's arrival as a sign to terminate the battle. Possibly, the CCF could not sustain further losses nor combat the arrival of additional American armor. Clearly, the cumulative effect of aerial support and additional armor also contributed significantly to the breaking of the CCF offensive. As the smoke cleared, the tremendous casualties inflicted on the CCF became apparent. Current Army doctrine emphasizes the need for attacking units to possess at least a 3-to-1 ratio over the defending force. Despite possessing a 6-to-1 advantage over the 23rd RCT, the CCF lost 1,742 soldiers, while the 23rd suffered only 52 killed and 119 wounded. The cost incurred by the CCF accentuates the difficulty in attacking a prepared defense.
ADP 3-90 states, defending commanders anticipate the success of their defense and their transition to the offense. Commanders should not wait too long to transition from a defense to an offense as an enemy force approaches its culminating point. Enemy forces will be dispersed, extended in depth, and weakened. At that time, any enemy defensive preparations will be hasty, and enemy forces will not be adequately prepared for defense. Additionally, the psychological shock on enemy soldiers will be greater if they suddenly find themselves desperately defending on new and often unfavorable terrain.
The 23rd RCT prevented the CCF from taking Chipyong-ni. The regiment achieved victory because of thorough defensive preparations, synchronized employment of combined arms, and the exploitation of the enemy's inability to coordinate its attack. It is not an exaggeration to say that the victory at Chipyong-ni served to boost the morale of the entire 8th Army as it prepared to resume offensive operations. As one American soldier put it,
at Chipyong-ni, the myth of communist invincibility was shattered, and a new pattern of achievement and victory was set in motion.
The future of civilization depends on what we do now, and in the months ahead.
The Big Picture is a weekly television report to the nation on the activities of the Army at home and overseas. Produced by the Signal Corps Pictorial Center. Presented by the U.S. Army in cooperation with this station. You can be an important part of the big picture. You can proudly serve with the best equipped, the best trained, the best fighting team in the world today, the United States Army.
And the Marines drove by. They just landed and still hadn't gotten into the fight, I guess, and uniforms still nicely pressed. And one of them leaned out of one of the trucks and yelled over, "Hey, cavalry, where's your horses?" And the staff sergeant looked up at him and said, "We ate them waiting for you guys to get here." And I thought I'd die when I heard that story.